the first time I reached out to you to ask if you wanted to be on the podcast.
What you told us?
In the literal minute before I sent a text to you, I happened to be on Facebook and saw your post about how podcasts were the end of humanity.
Oh, right. You got
and I was like, oh no.
She did send me that.
I stopped texting you. I texted Ron and I was like, yeah, I'm still going to do it.
That's true. That's right.
I was like, I'm still going to do it. I think he'll do it.
Yeah. I appreciate you.
I've listened to a few since, but you know.
But you're a TED Talk guy.
Yeah, you got that going on in Roxbury coming up,
but
right?
I don't listen to podcasts much.
Well, now you have
podcasts are the new mixtapes.
Ooh.
People, everybody's
Everybody
trying to rap.
can just do one, yeah.
Everybody's trying to be a realtor. Everyone's trying to.
But what if
Ron's also a realtor?
I am.
And a rapper.
I am a rapper too. That's funny. Those are all true facts too. That's funny.
I mean, it's exploration.
Yeah.
Maris and I were just talking about this of like deciding what you love, like figuring out what you love.
I like to think like we're the 50 Cent of mixtapes though. Like we're the 50 Cent of podcasts.
Oh, 50,
you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like 50 took the mixtape or with the Wu-Tang.
And then he went and bought a water company.
That's what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? Wu-Tang. They used it to put that Wu-wear on.
Parlay. They parlayed.
It was a catapult. Wasn't the end goal.
Catapult. Oh, funny. That's a funny reference.
A trebuchet.
Eric knows the reference to catapult in my old life at Skillworks.
Was that a word that was like often
used?
It's
a initiative that right before I left Skillworks, we had started.
She launched it.
And it's not unrelated, to the ripple effect, actually, in the idea that because of the way funding happens, we dilute ourselves by trying to like be everything to everybody. And Catapult was meant to try to, along the continuum of workforce services in Boston, could we identify organizations that have a strength in the beginning, middle, and end of someone's sort of pathway rather than trying to be everything to everybody all at once. And so that was kind of the concept of Catapult. There was a lot of other elements to it. And right as it was slingshotting back, I was like, oh, and I'm leaving.
Oh, wow.
But they're still working on it. They mentioned it.
Yeah.
Eric and I were just together for the 20th anniversary of Skillworks, and they mentioned it. Yeah. So they're still working on it. Yeah. So are we ready?
We're on.
This is the classic ripple effect move is we start on some tangent and then at some point Mario's like, we're recording now.
We're recording already, so.
Yes.
You probably did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mario loves that authentic piece.
Yes. We've talked about a lot of things pre-podcast, pre-recording. Yes. Or recording things that probably we shouldn't put public out.
So yeah, true. Make sure you watch the last episode though, because I got the dopest shirt on you ever seen.
Oh, yeah, I did send it to you. If you watched it, you saw the
plain white shirt.
Nah, it's not plain white, bro.
It's the puffy shirt, puffy pirate shirt.
I got ruffles in here, and I got lace. I got
we didn't
lace on the sleeve.
I feel like we didn't do it as much justice as we could have in the podcast.
Oh yeah, no,
we referenced it.
White shirt on, and then you were matching him or something. But.
Yes.
So I gotta bring it back with a little bit more oomph. I gotta be more overt in my.
I think you'll need to purchase a different shirt that is. Yeah.
Yeah, you had the mic in front of you.
That's true.
Yeah, we just didn't. Yeah, we didn't acknowledge. We didn't give it enough attention.
That's okay. That's all right. But listen, we got Eric Esteves with us.
Yes,
Esteves. Listen, and so I think before we even go into as a matter of fact, you should introduce Eric.
I'm a bridger, so welcome everyone to the Ripple Effect. Marybeth Campbell,
Ron Waddell,
co-hosts, and guest number 2.
Yes,
episode 6. Tried so hard to get Eric Esteves here, and here he is in the woo, despite his
disdain for podcasts.
This might be a pivotal moment in his podcast life, though. He's going to be, and tomorrow we got a shout out. Tomorrow you're on, doing some live radio discussions.
Yeah, I guess it's some. I don't know if he considers himself a podcast or not, though. Yeah,
well, you're hitting the circuit, so you embrace it, Eric. Yeah, you're in it.
Yeah. I'll watch him in 20 years.
So I think, good to, in my life, I'm a big bridger. I love bridging people in my life, socially, professionally, and otherwise. And so Eric and I have known each other, is it maybe going on 10 years? Yeah. We worked together at the Boston Foundation. We shared a wall. between our offices, and shared other things about working at the Boston Foundation. And Eric just reminded me that I actually departed before he did in the chronology of events to go. I came here. I came to Worcester Community Action Council.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
And so, Eric and I became good friends. And as I came here and met you, you were kind of starting up and seeking relationships.
Eric you're the last person that I met before the pandemic.
Pre-pandemic.
Yes.
I shut everything down. Like real talk. I remember Marybeth introduced me to Eric. We were brand new, hoping to raise some funds, and they were like, "Look, man, I don't know who to talk to besides Greater Worcester and folks that were local."
Yeah.
And Marybeth was like, "Nah, I know this dude." And I was like, "For real?"
Exactly what I said.
literally. I know this guy. And I hit him up, and then I drove out there. One of the things, though, I think that is really cool, too, as I was thinking about this podcast, Eric, was the importance of representation.
Mm-hmm.
Because coming into that space as a nonprofit, talking to a funder in Boston, knew I was already having some anxiety and some reticence of how this is going to go, you know. And the thing that was dope was in your profile, you mentioned your love for hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not remember, but I remember because I thought about it. I thought it was dope, right? I got an ego. But on the way over there, I was like,
what?
I'm going to ask this dude about what his favorite hip hop is. That's how I'm going to open the conversation. I'm going to ask him who his favorite artist is. And part of that was real cool because that's my life. I grew up with hip hop, you know. And so in other spaces, there's different things that I get to talk about. But this was something that was core to who I was to be able to kick that with you. So
what was my answer, though?
We got into it. You answered it in a very he answered it in a very Eric Esteves way.
It's like it wasn't a direct answer.
No, exactly.
It was the holistic
he gave me more to think about. He gave me more to think about in regards to my question. Best. Well, I mean, let's really look at best. When you talk about who is the best, there's different styles. There's different styles. There's cadence. That's accurate. And so that's kind of how it went, if I remember.
Well, you are like among my friends and professional peers, like you are one. I just said this. Like you're one of the most like calm affect people I know. But you're very you have such a catalog in like the social aspects of who you are, in your cultural aspects of where you tie things in, and in your professional career, like just even like going back just in prep for this interview, I was like, oh my gosh, I forget that he like your breadth of experience is.
Were you on my LinkedIn?
I didn't go on your LinkedIn.
That's the thing now.
I did not go on your LinkedIn. I have been on your LinkedIn before, but I recalled an interview that you did a while back on digital equity.
Oh, yeah.
And I went back to that because I was just kind of like looking for little snippets and connections of things. That's what I did on the plane ride to Florida the other day. And it just reminded me of like how like deep of experience and breadth of experience that you have. Like you have an engineering background, information systems. You were at Boston Public Schools. You've really stretched this like very wide breadth of experiences that I think is really unique, actually. And you bring that uniqueness to your work too, which is why when someone asks you a question, you're like, well, how am I going to answer this? Right. Which will make this next 45 minutes really fun.
So Eric, tell us, man, Marybeth alluded to a couple of the things you've done. Where are you now? What brings you to this conversation? And we're hoping to really talk around the themes of like scarcity and frugality, equity, prohibition, all these kind of things we've talked about on the previous podcast and all, but give the folks that are listening a little background. Because you're not even from here neither, right? You're from like South Carolina?
Exactly. So yeah, I grew up in South Carolina in the Charleston area. My ancestry is from the Sea Island, so Ediston Island. My family goes back generations there. Also, I have Puerto Rican ancestry, hence the name. So, you know, my identities are as a Black man first, but also I'm Afro-Latino as well. And grew up in South Carolina, came up to Boston to go to Northeastern and stayed, you know, got embedded in the community early, lived all over the city of Boston and, you know, made it my home. And I'm aware of the brain drain that has happened over the years, but I'm someone who like came to Boston and found Black people immediately and remain there. And I've become an ambassador essentially for the region. So often people will connect their friends to me if they move to town to help them get acclimated, or they'll send their friends to me too late because they ended up moving to Chelmsford or Tingsboro, places like that, where they're feeling stuck, and then they leave and they hate it, and they met me in the last month before they left.
Got you. You said something, man, that stuck out to me. You're very intentional with saying you were Afro-Latino.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually interested if we can unpack a little bit of that, because sometimes within that space too, we're talking about nonprofit work and ripple effect, but can you talk a little bit more with that designation and why you chose to be intentional about saying Afro-Latino?
For me, for one, the last name, it always lends itself to questions. And then being in Boston, you can, people look at me, are you Black? Are you Latino? Are you Cape Verdean? Are you Dominican? What are you? I'm usually like, whatever. But for me, it's intentional because, that's my ancestry. And also, when you think about race and white supremacy and skin color, my Puerto Rican ancestors, my grandfather, he was dark skinned, and a lot of my Puerto Rican cousins are darker. So I don't necessarily look like the typical profile of Latinos. And then when you think in the bigger context of like Latino representation around education, the leaders are more fair skinned than dark skinned. And I grew up in South Carolina, so, all my peoples were in the Bronx. So I learned Spanish in school, but I didn't learn Spanish speaking it at the home. So I'm not fluent at all. I can pick up pieces. I've been on Duolingo lately. I don't speak Spanish.
Memrise, also a good one. Memrise,
I don't speak Spanish fluently. So I actually have a close friend who, his father's, they're very Latino, but he doesn't speak Spanish fluently. And we talk about that kind of conundrum as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I think that touches a little bit on your question, kind of leads and segues into a little bit around some of the impetus of the ripple effect, and myself being a white female gay leader in the city of a large organization that benefits sometimes from being large. And has sort of a respected, trusted brand built over the years out of good work, hard work, good outcome, but I think has some embedded blind trust built in because we have certain components in our agency that allows us to meet compliance and write grants and that kind of capacity. And I would say majority of our larger nonprofits tend to be white-led, whereas our smaller nonprofits that are also more, I think, zip codes, street-by-street level type of community-based nonprofits tend to be more BIPOC-led. And there's been frustration around the imbalance and inequity of that, and how funding either doesn't happen at all. There's underfunding, undervaluing in funding, which we've talked a lot about in our series of conversations around what that means for capacity and staffing and that kind of stuff. But that was kind of part of the conversation that Ron and I have had over the years is we as an agency, in acknowledging the benefits we get in the ecosystem, in the role we historically have played, versus where I'm trying to move us forward is, can we generate this kind of ripple effect where large versus small, white-led versus BIPOC-led, regardless, can we, one, be acknowledging of the inequities in the ecosystem, and two, be part of it in a way that creates a little bit more equity, but just better value for value partnership. And that's where Ron and our partnership kind of started. Between WCAC and LL. But, you've been in so many different roles, both on the working for Boston Public Schools and trying to get resources in an under-resourced environment. You've been a funder in large philanthropy at Boston Foundation, a really critical role at the Lenny Zakem Fund, and now you're at Boston Main Streets, which is a small business focus area. Where would you say, in your experiences, there are kind of commonalities around some of the challenges and inequities regardless of, the sector, and where, like, advice for our direction of how we're influencing our own pathway.
Okay, no easy stuff.
Easy questions.
Yeah.
We just like to dive right in. Yes.
Yeah, I think in terms of challenges, one is always around the notion of whose expertise is valued. So, with smaller organizations, they certainly do have, the lived experience or the real on the ground expertise, but also may not have the capacity to fully focus on it. So, for instance, when you first started Legendary Legacies, you were also figuring out how to run a nonprofit organization. So I think there's, even if people have the functional skills of what their programmatic focus area is, they may not have the financial and accounting skills. And let me file this attorney general paperwork skills to be able to focus fully on the programming work that they're focused on.
That's so real. We almost lost our nonprofit status. I ain't lying, because we didn't file a 990 for the first 2 years, and then someone was like, "Bro, if you don't do it for 3 years, you lose the 501." What? So then we got an accountant and I figured it out. Yeah, no one knew that, but we got it done.
Now I know why I got that phone call.
Do you have any record of the money you get? Yeah, man. We was learning all that on the fly.
Yeah. So people learn on the fly, but there's not necessarily training. Well, there is training, but you don't necessarily know that it exists. It's not necessarily widely offered, and it's not necessarily widely recognized. So, and also people. So, if you think of people when they're applying for jobs, they'll see the job description, and they may not apply for the job if they don't meet every single bullet point.
That's real.
Or they'll see the job description and say, "Yeah, I don't qualify," even though they might meet 80% of the job, and then the other people might apply if they only meet 40%. So I think the same thing goes is that it's the framing. So I'm running a nonprofit, but really you're running a nonprofit business.
Yes.
Thank you.
A theme.
Listen,
we are trying
hit the
to
applause on
constantly.
That.
There's still, there's for-profit businesses and nonprofit businesses. So they're still businesses. They still have kind of the common things around financial management and HR and operations management that has to go on. So, but people don't necessarily always recognize that, who are running these small organizations. But on the flip side, funders or business folks don't necessarily recognize the value that they are running a business. So they treat the nonprofits almost like a second-class status as well.
Do you want to come to the Dan Pallotta Uncharitable movie with us?
Yes, we're going to check out that. So you mentioned thing about a business, and we talked about that on the podcast previously at all the time. I'm always bringing it up that it's a business. One of the things that I think is interesting, though, because I was in private business before, too. When I was in private business, it was a matter of making sure that we're in this unique space. Keep your strategy to yourself. I don't want no one else to know our strategy on the market, because someone might take it and cut into, my ability to grow the business. Within the nonprofit sector, my thoughts are that it should be different. But a lot of times we still community-based, because no one nonprofit is going to solve the issue. But sometimes we run into this challenge, right? Even early on, real talk, working with WCAC or working with other nonprofits. Me, as growing up, I'm like, man, I got this idea. I have some of these programs. I don't want no one to know about it, because they might take it, replicate it, and as a grassroots nonprofit, this is what I've seen, which I really appreciate, what WCAC did in this fashion, right? It's like, all right, cool. I got folks at the grassroots level doing this work with the lived experience and expertise, and so they come up with a program. But there's a certain ethos and fidelity that they're going to do that program with, that if another entity then replicates it, dilutes that efficacy, right? And overall hurting the community. And so we see this I've seen it, and it's happened to me in the past. But what would you share from your perspective of being a funder as nonprofits in that constellation, try to work together, large, smaller nonprofits, and really trying to bridge that gap for those smaller nonprofits to work with larger nonprofits so that they don't take their idea and replicate it in a way that does not stay true to the ethos and the fidelity of what was originally done?
Yeah, I think I'll use the phrase framing again. If you think about Amazon and how they kind of take up a lot of space and their impact on small businesses and mom and pop shops, or Walmart and how, what what their impact has been, especially in the South, where Walmart is the grocery store and the convenience store and everything, right? So because they've kind of taken up so much space that, there's not much room for other smaller businesses. So in the same vein, large organizations, how are they encouraging innovation and not encouraging competition? So for me, I think it's nuanced in that replication can make sense in some ways and places. And then in other ways it doesn't, because then, someone is, replicating something, but not to the same level and doing something, in a slightly different variation, but it may not necessarily be the most beneficial for the client or the population being served. But on the flip side, companies replicate all the time. So there's tons of companies that see another product and they kind of put a little spin on it, or they just make it in another country cheaper, and just make it cheaper and maybe not a little bit better, but you get it quicker and it's more convenient. So replication is an issue across the board, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. But then also another school of thought is that sometimes some people feel like there are too many nonprofits doing similar things because they're competing for scarce resources. And then, the notion of them merging could leverage like an economy of scale. 3 nonprofits doing the same thing could combine to one, sharing this overhead operational budget, and then more money overall is being shifted to that programmatic area. So, that's why I say it's nuanced, because you could go several ways with it.
We talked a lot, Marybeth, about saturation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And oversaturation.
Or the perceived notion.
Perceived notion. And I think what you're talking about right now really kind of bridged perfectly into your thoughts around that. Yeah,
I think that's been, myself being in the role of funder previously and now being on the other side of that. And we talked last episode with Pete Dunn, the CEO of Greater Worcester Foundation. We talked a little bit about that in the context of what he thinks the role of a foundation, a community foundation, is not so much to be like, hey, you and you need to get together. Mm-hmm. It's more like if the organizations come to the foundation, they can help facilitate that, and they have the grease and the wheel, the resources to help that happen, versus saying like, you guys, we don't want to spend money on both of you, so you guys should just merge. And I think that perspective from a community foundation is really helpful to say like, we're not going to tell you to do this and play matchmaker, but if you guys think that as 2 nonprofits that are either competing or think you can benefit from bringing your strengths together and filling up a gap, then we can help facilitate that thing.
Sometimes those suggestions are helpful, though, because some organizations are saying, they do something similar, but I do it so unique that we should stay our unique entity, when not really. Is it that unique that you're doing it slightly different than this other entity? That, I both agree. Yes, you don't necessarily need to tell people you two need to merge, but also providing context of the bigger picture, right? It might make sense for 2 struggling entities to merge, especially if they're doing something very similar and then have slight strands of uniqueness to it. Yeah, they can implement it jointly in those 2 kind of almost like an A/B testing model, right?
Yeah, and I think there's got to be some will and interest there. Obviously, maybe some slight nudging, possibly.
I think some of it. And I haven't been in spaces, so, Eric, Marybeth, if you guys know, or those out there, put in the comments where you've seen it. But who are the entities that are helping nonprofits understand that and really work through that? Because I think at the core, most folks, I shouldn't say most, but if you can provide the roadmap of how that could work out, I think a lot of the hesitancy for all of us is the unknown, right? Yeah. There are firms that help businesses merge that will come in and really work through that culture process, really who's going to run that, especially if you're a founder. Like if you started it and you're going to merge with another founder, now you're bringing also your own ideologies because that's your child that you built. And so are there entities and nonprofits that are out there or organizations that are helping have that conversation and educate, to your point? That's an unknown. How do I navigate that space? Is that out there?
I think it exists in some format, certainly. I know, there are even just locally, Massachusetts wise, there are, the Mass Nonprofit Network. There are capacity building or nonprofit support within community foundations. There's Third Sector New England. I don't know necessarily that, because I don't know if we're just in the zeitgeist right now since we've started this podcast and we're just paying more attention to some of actively seeking out and researching information about what we're talking about. So maybe it's just kind of coming through in the AI of Google and news feeds.
Algorithm.
Yeah, but there does seem to be maybe post-COVID, and there was a lot of, I think, there's been a lot of shift in philanthropy over the years. Trust-based philanthropy, I think, being a driver. Collective impact grants, I think has been an element of that. So I do think one string and stream of thought is around some of this, what we're talking about right now, and that maybe is catching some ground a little bit, some speed in the conversation. But I don't know that there's a lot that exists in capacity building I think there's facilitation of mergers. Yeah. And I think there's
dedicated.
Yeah,
right.
But I don't know that it necessarily is born out of this per se, I mean, there's a lot, like Ken Bates could tell you in terms of merging, how Open Sky merged the bridge and, oh my gosh, we'll have to edit this because I can't remember the name of the other organization. So that happens, and there are consultants and frameworks.
Those were behemoths already,
right?
Like those were entities that could bring in outside consultants. I'm not sure if they did or didn't, but they had the resources to be able to.
So I do think that exists. I just don't know if it comes from a place around. I think it comes from a place of efficiency. I don't know if it comes from a place of actually creating larger greater impact. Exactly. Yeah.
Probably more place of urgency.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Maybe there's an organization that is failing. I don't think that was that wasn't the Open Sky case. That's not a good example for that. But there's an organization that's losing its status
And shout out to the Mass Nonprofit Network, for real. They just had their annual meeting. Yeah. Actually out here in Worcester. On the 19th. Idealism in Action. And they supported one of my staff members 2 years ago with the Young Nonprofit of the Year Award. Nice. So respect to them and doing lots of good stuff out there. Yeah. But
I do think there's a bit of a shift in the conversation. And maybe that's an area of, because and this kind of leads to my next question, is Worcester is going through a lot of change. Mostly for the good. There's great prosperity, but there's an imbalance. We're facing gentrification, high housing costs, high growing homelessness. You name it. We're going through what most large cities. What's your face look like?
Because I mean, like it's interesting. Like it is like there's good things happening, but I'm just always fascinated. Even me. Like when I tell that story, I always start with, let me soften the blow that we got people homeless out here and people struggling. Like I always feel like I gotta soften the language.
Well, it shouldn't. Yeah, it's not.
I'm not saying you did, but when you hear it, like it triggered in me. Like I'm talking about always. First, let me make sure I say that everything is going well and there's all these excellent opportunities. But like I can't lead with, you know what I'm saying?
You're trying to give the good news first.
Sandwich it. Yeah.
But that, I think or
is it just a pragmatic reality? Both things. I can lead with either one.
You can, because I think this is not, what we're facing is not unique to cities that have experienced this. However, I think because we are surrounded by cities that have experienced this more recently than us, Boston had a resurgence, Brooklyn, you name it. Like, and you've been part of, you're a Boston guy,
through and through,
via Charleston, and deep roots there as well. I know, but you touch so many parts in Boston in your life. Raising children there, your own career, your even like the fun things that you did that we're going to talk about later. So you have a real pulse on that, and you've seen, you're a very critical thinking person and introspective. Like you've seen those shifts and change and like the downside of that. And as nonprofit leaders, we've talked a lot about this, is like our response, this like Pavlovian response to need, doesn't, regardless of what level of resources we have, we're going to respond. And
scope
there's
creep.
And there's that. Yeah, exactly. Like what is your warning shots for us as nonprofit leaders. And we're in the middle. We're in the
what
middle
innovative
of this
strategies should we implement to mitigate things that you experienced?
Yeah. And thoughts on like our cautious approach too.
Yeah, another easy question. I mean, I think it's all about balance or equilibrium, or maybe not necessarily an equilibrium, but finding a balance. I said scope creep. So, often organizations will stretch to fulfill a need or serve a population that may be not being served well or underserved. I think it's one about asking that population to be involved in determining that. Because sometimes it's an assumption that this is what will work when you don't necessarily know that. So I think kind of that adage, Ayanna Pressley, has been popularizing it more recently, do nothing about me without me. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's one around involving the client or population served in the decision-making process, or even the assessing process of, does this even make sense for us to be doing long-term, or should we just do this short-term to like fill the gap? So that's one part. I think also kind of on the flip side and from the funding perspective, as much as possible, doing more participatory grant-making processes and getting more people involved. I think it flattens the power dynamic is another strategy. I think it's also just recognizing that it's the fatalistic, pessimistic view that you can't necessarily solve everything, because clearly, it's 2023 and we haven't solved everything yet. So I think
our breaking news again.
Focus and intentionality is important. So, some organizations, it may not be scope creep, but they have so many different programs that it seems like they're multiple entities as opposed to an organization that really focuses on a few things.
Yeah, I mentioned this in the last episode, but had a conversation recently with the head of a small organization in the city that has a long term objective on a capital project. But it's taking time, and they're raising a lot of funds to meet the objective of building this capital project. And in the meantime, people are like, TikTok, what are you doing? You're getting all this money. So they've started to scope creep a little bit because they're just trying to generate it's kind of a reactive, responsive building. Like, trust us, we are doing this thing that we're planning to do. But in the meantime, they've completely overwhelmed themselves by doing all these smaller programmatic elements that they're not misaligned, but they are taking up an incredible amount of capacity. So it's slowing down the long-term objective.
And are they good at it? So I think, if you look at it the same way that you would look at an individual, are they generalists, specialists, or experts?
Yeah.
Some people can be like expert generalists, but most can't. So just like that, I think with the same with organizations, some can be really good generalists and do a lot of things well. Well, do a lot of things. Some can be expert generalists, but very few can do a lot of things really well.
Yeah.
So I think, it's kind of, you just make that same analogy for an organization to see which ones are, truly effective and impactful if they're doing a bunch of different things.
Right. And that we've a little bit slight off topic, but we've talked about this in terms of building good teams. Like, how do you become a good leader, good manager? Because you cannot be everything to everybody. You can't be good. It's unlikely you're going to be good at everything, every vertical part of the role of the organization. So you need to have balanced expertise and knowledge and capacity. And as a nonprofit, it's really hard to justify funding those positions that aren't programmatic. And, you and I just went through, the grant application. Absolutely. It's like, what do you assign as admin? And you can't assign a whole FTE to this because this grant can't pay, how do you justify?
Right.
Yet actually having that position of like an chief, operating officer, or director of operations that can focus on that component and which is capacity building too. Yep. Justifying that because it's not programmatically serving, but it actually will make the organization more effective in the long run,
yep.
And that's a really hard thing to justify.
And I think that's also the flaw, because I think you're usually justifying that to people that are coming from more of a business and corporate perspective.
Right.
That's what I was
Yes.
And they're looking to solve nonprofit business problems with for-profit business problems, which aren't always the same skill sets, and also the same kind of what do they call it? Key performance objectives, because
KPIs.
The way that they're looking at their bottom line is just differently than how nonprofits are looking at it. Yeah, their return is different. And also in the nonprofit world, the returns are less tangible. The outcomes and the inputs might be more tangible, but the long-term return is less quantifiable, less predetermined, for clear goal.
And the other thing with that is, in a lot of the spaces where nonprofits are bridging the gap for municipalities, states, all that, so on and so forth, it is a long-term investment, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the stock market, I put my money in the stock market. I know I'm going to leave it in there for a while and let that thing grow. I'm looking for results over a period of time. As we think about the nonprofit.
Do you have any tips for that?
Well, that's another podcast. Follow me on that one.
Let me know.
But in thinking about that type of long-term investment, to be able to get the real impact numbers that you want, I think all that kind of gets into this conversation too. I'm not sure if the nonprofit you were meeting with had this issue. We were really, really blessed to be networked and meet with you and meet with other folks to be able to get some sustainable funding, so we didn't have to scope creep, because we wasn't jumping over here taking $10,000 and doing $5,000. Do we really do that? And so I'm coming around to a question of there's got to be innovative strategies to address that. And so from your experience, breadth of perspective, what are the barriers to innovation? Is it that there's a business mindset from a for-profit coming into these spaces, because most of our board members may be for-profit, right? And they're trying to help manage nonprofits. I'm not sure. I'm just throwing it out. What have been barriers in your experience to those innovative strategies?
Okay. I'm going to back up, though.
Appreciate you.
So I'm going to back up to the stock market. So if you think about bonds, they're slow and steady growth. And you can see the analogy in government programs or very large nonprofits, and it's slow and steady, but not necessarily innovative. And then where the market, the day markets, are more philanthropy is often considered risk capital for government. So to, initially to try innovation and do experimental things. And then the next step would be kind of like the VC world. It's more risky, even more so than the stock market, but then the returns are more promising. So you're trying to invest in those even more promising innovations and programs that might have more dramatic impact than that slow and steady growth like the bond. So, I thought that was a good analogy, comparing it to the stock market. In terms of barriers, I think it's one is around the mindset, the lens that people are approaching problem solving with. I think it's also sometimes a lack of will, a lack of political will, often, sometimes, a lack of imagination and creativity. People often sometimes sell themselves short in terms of thinking big, but kind of force, stalling out before they are able to convey that big idea. Yeah. So it's almost like stopping short of really jumping off the cliff and flapping the wings. To be more risk averse, as opposed to really taking that big leap.
I wanted to read this quote, though, based on what you just said. The next time you're looking at a charity, don't ask about the rate of their overhead. Ask about the scale of their dreams. Their Apple, Google, Amazon scale dreams, how they measure their progress toward those dreams, and what resources they need to make them come true, regardless of what their overhead is.
How did you capture that? Did you write that as he was saying it? Or you remembered it?
I listened to the thing, and then
you have a very didactic memory.
So it back.
Yeah. Oh, it was recorded?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. Come on, man. This is 2023.
I didn't know. I did not know that.
He just copied the caption.
Yeah.
Well, he's
you don't need to go to school at all.
This is, and it comes from your upbringing. He has just burst in verse, and so he'll just put something. And I'm like, I have to go write this down and then Google it later. So I didn't know that was recorded. I was like, did you just remember every single word that he said?
No, I'm prepared. I'm prepared. And part of that was dope. As you talk about like the VC component, but like that ability to say like on the reverse side, what you just said is so real, is that there's an ability to dream that big, right? Like what's possible?
Well, there's always something I struggle with this actually as a leader here, because I've been saying often lately, like I don't want to be the CEO of a traditional community action program. I respect the history of community action. I respect my peers. I think there's incredible work happening, but there's been not a lot of acknowledgement that we exist as an aftermarket solution to root causes that were intentionally exactly, or that they frankly created too. And so we're driven by this compliance mindset. And there are days where I'm like, I think, why don't we just let's just try that. And I'm like, oh geez, is somebody going to come along and like, slap my wrist?
So to that point, that government created, or that the for-profit world created. But also with the idea of dreams and dreaming big or not. If you think about even like putting together a grant application and writing it and putting together the budget, full costs. Are you putting in the full cost of what it actually costs to run the program, or are you kind of stopping short and not putting in those full costs? You need a full-time admin person. You need a full-time COO, because that's the big dream. This is what it truly costs for us to run this program, and more clearly conveying that and explaining that and driving the point home so that the folks on the other side of the table understand that. But also, we need the folks on the other side of the table to be able to understand that. So for them to be learning around what that means to dream big, and then fund big dreams, taking that, making those riskier investments, or, and then redefining what risk means also. Why is it a risky investment to fund the COO role that is necessary in the for-profit world?
One of the other things that I think is key to the ripple effect we talked about is how we fostered our relationship over time.
Yeah, definitely.
And over food and arguments. And
yes. Knock down, drag out, tears.
And tears. Yeah, remember that? That was. I will never understand.
I will never forget that, because I think we do a better job listening to each other over our evolution of our relationship. That was a pivotal moment for me. You were so emotional about this our conversation.
Yeah, I was invested.
And for me, I was being like very formulaic about the approach, because I was like, I was in the bigger agency mindset of like, this is just how it is.
Not gonna do that. You can't do it.
But it made me, I had to go back and think. I'm like, oh my God, why was he so emotional? And then I felt bad also, because I was like, did I make him cry?
That's happened to me ever since I was a little kid. Whenever
normally I'm the crier.
If I get plugged in, my emotions, even if I'm upset, when I used to get in fights, I'd be crying.
But I think that the point is though, but you built that organization from the ground up, like your blood, sweat, tears, heart, every piece of you is in it. And so in your desire for success. And I think what can happen over time is it dissipates a little bit, because you're so distracted by all this other BS that we have to comply with, and you can get a little jaded. And so that moment for me had a lot of elements in it, but and if anything, it was like, oh no, we are going to turn this into being good friends and figuring this out. But at the same time, for me, it was like, it is a reminder to be like, I have emotion in this too. I take this personally also.
Yeah, leverage those tears.
Yeah.
Listen, exactly. So early on when I started, I
cried in an interview once. I didn't get that job. I was assured it wasn't. It didn't hurt me, but I was like, I think it might have.
Did I share on the last podcast how I leveraged some tears? I think I told y'all off air how I leveraged some tears. So Pete, I spoke at the Greater Worcester. I think it was Forum on Poverty or something.
Yeah.
It was right after my divorce, bro.
It was our I wasn't I was on the board. I wasn't the CEO. it was the last anti-poverty forum.
Pete, right? So I'm like, it's like 3 months into the thing, right? And they're like, Ron, we want you to speak about the program y'all running, right? So I'm up there sharing about it, and I start breaking down, crying. Everybody's like, wow, he's really committed. That is not what I was crying about. But
your mind was open.
But it had the effect.
Yeah.
I was going to say this early on, though, in my fundraising. I think I'm still early on. I was given this book, and for full disclosure, I'm a Christian, and brother gave me this book called The Spirituality of Giving by Father Henry Nouwen, Dutch Catholic priest, right? And so I think it gets to what you were talking about, because he says this, right? Fundraising calls people into communion with God, with one another. It must hold out the real possibility of friendship and community. And so what I was curious about is, broadly, our structures, how are they set up to prevent that type of friendship and community? I think about how we've been able to develop our friendship in these things, but also as a funder, right? Like, what limitations do you have to really foster those relationships and build community with those that you're funding? And do you see that broadly in this space? People do business with who they know. People do business with who they like. And so at the end of the day, it is relationships, whether it's in the nonprofit sector or the for-profit sector. How do we build and cultivate spaces for funders and nonprofits to really build that friendship? Or is that a thing?
I think it's possible. It's organic. And I also think it's tricky because, for example, as a funder, yes, you should, ideally, you should foster collaboration, but then is it seen as you forcing collaboration?
Manipulation.
Right? Because you are the funder. So then there's a power dynamic that's inherent that people are deferring to you more because you have the money, so to speak. So is it seen as is a suggestion seen more as a command? Or is it better if it's coming externally from a more neutral party or from the ground up?
He said, is a suggestion seen as a command?
Yeah. I mean, I do think there is, and this, we've talked about this, but this is true of across sectors of funding, whether it's public or philanthropic, et cetera, and this has to do with how you respond with information you're requested from, like you want to appease the relationship. Like, let's just settle at the point of you're going to continue to fund us, right?
I don't want to upset the apple cart.
Right. I want you to continue to sustain your funding. So I'm going to do I'm going to give you what you're asking for. Mm-hmm. But like we talked about with Pete last episode, is sometimes you can be in compliance but not be effective. Oh. And, for community action especially, where we go through this ROMA process, results-oriented management, something.
Accountability.
Thank you. And it's the most frustrating process because it's just service counts. Mm-hmm. How many services did somebody get? Right. Not what happened as a result. And it's a balance to push that, because I get aggravated internally, but externally I'm like, well, I don't also want to change it so much that I have to do this other report too. But we are trying to build our own dashboards and metrics of are we actually being effective? And nobody asks us that question, And on the other end of that scale, and as you know, Eric, there would be times I would walk into my office at SkillWorks and there'd just be a very large check sitting on my desk from somebody and who we didn't really have a relationship with, but just felt good about writing the check and felt good about helping people, which is also incredibly appreciated because it's flexible and it's I'm going to be able to do something else with it. But the challenge with that is that person isn't invested so much in the work of sustainability, but it's more that person might be more invested in I feel good writing this check.
But maybe they are. And you don't necessarily know because they may be invested and they recognize the value of unrestricted money.
True. That's a good way that's a more positive light to look at it.
But with the dashboard, I think it's important, even if there is data that you have that is not important to the person requesting, I think it's useful to still include that in the reporting. Yeah. Because managing and knowing your own data is important because they may be asking you for data that you don't necessarily use. It's just the counts. But then what are the counts impacting that helps inform and transform your programmatic work.
Oh, you done opened up something for me right there with that one, brother. Because I would say early on for us, and what you're doing, building out your own dashboard.
Early stages. I don't want to overpromise, but
no. But that sparked something in me, because that ability as a small nonprofit starting out, we're using the databases that are prescribed to us by these funders. And so the data that we're producing, one, in a lot of spaces, we didn't own the data. Mm-hmm. We didn't even own our own data. We had to go through another entity to get the data that we developed and created. But then, because it wasn't measuring what we wanted to measure, we've got to figure out how to build something to be able to do that, to communicate effectively. And I learned really quickly, I mean, you can start small, right, with your Google Sheets and all that, and put some data out. That's what we was doing.
It gets cumbersome.
But it does it, really. Like, which one is that? Like, I thought you already had. We got 3 of the same sheets tracking the same thing. Yeah. But at the end of the day, that's big money. And we were blessed by Blue Cross Blue Shield to support us and being able to go buy the software, which was like 20 racks. Mm-hmm. And then to have someone build, this is when they got me too. I didn't know you had to pay someone to build it out. Listen, man, they was like, look.
Off the shelf versus,
They were like, oh, no, man, we're going to put you in and then we're going to give you a training. I was like, cool. So I went through the training. They were like, now you train 8 hours, you should be able to build it yourself. Like, nah, I don't do that. So we had to go hire another entity, right? And again, we were supported by some other funders to do that. But at the end of the day, to begin to get the data we wanted, we was into it for probably about $35,000, $40,000, right? And so as a small grassroots who's capturing those things that aren't at that level, we're having this conversation about data and capturing it in the way you want. But to your point, there are these power structures, right, that keep you from being able to do that. I don't really have a question around that, but I think like it just got real for me, because it just kept, I just want to be able to speak to what I'm hoping to speak to. And then coming and find out, it costs this amount of money to really be able to do that in a way to produce that data out to potential funders and other external parties, what we are really doing. Because our work is really nuanced and it is longitudinal. And so in those iterative moments, like being able to build that capacity comes back to the conversation of innovative funding and the ripple effect. How do funders come around and support that type of innovation? Because it's like, I want the data on what you do, but I'm not going to really fund that.
And how do we support each other in that? Because I think there are elements of infrastructure that some organizations have versus others, but yet there's a little bit of a wall between ability to share data, for example. And we were just talking about this in our board level. We have a board member who's incredible. We have a great board, but there's one particular board member who's makes the same point regularly, and I often feel like, oh God, we've never like satiated that question for her, because it's a work in progress for us too. But we are the holders of a lot of information because we do community assessments that have a lot of strands to it, and so we use it to build our strategic plan, and that's a whole other, like, strategic planning is a whole other conversation. But we could do a better job getting that snippets of data out, even if we just put like a visual out and said, what do people think about this piece of data? We're not great. It's not that we don't want to share it. It's just we don't do a great job distributing it. And I think that's an area that we could be more helpful in, because we do have that regular cadence of getting real-time information from clients and partners, et cetera. And, Pete, we talked about this too, Eric, you and I worked at the Boston Foundation, and our offices were down a hallway that was the closest to where, like, there was a forum, I don't know, every week, if not like every day. There was some kind of anchor research being discussed, or forum, or use of space for nonprofits for free, just to convene and use the front part of the Boston Foundation just for community forum and discussion. And I think that's a little bit lacking where we are in a regular cadence. But we actually have a lot of information that we could probably do a better job sharing.
So one thing that comes to mind for me is you have a ton of colleges here, so it could be an opportunity for like a work study project. Tableau is one example of a product. You use merged data visualization. with what you have. It could be in small doses of like how you are sharing out what you're doing with the community you're impacting. But then also to the point of kind of the data, similar to the fundraising. I think it's based on the relationship. So if the funder is funding the specific intervention you're implementing, then that makes sense for them to be determining the data that they're requesting. Some people go against the grain and they submit what they want to submit, or they submit the reports that they want to submit that make sense. Because some people often, they might just be asking, what are the number of people served this year or this quarter? Well, that's not really like meaningful data. So some people, and there's a movement. So you mentioned trust-based philanthropy. The movement is part of that is allowing an organization to submit the same report that they submitted already to a funder, as opposed to recreating that same report. So you have your report that has all the data that is meaningful, and then that's what you're submitting as your final report versus duplicating the wheel over and over and then customizing each report, which takes up a lot of time, which then distracts from focusing on the work.
Got you. This is the one that's been burning in me since I got your list of questions, though.
Did you have the same reaction as Eric? Because Eric was like, "What
I
are you
don't know.
doing?"
But where's the nickname Pops come from?
Oh yeah, right.
This is a big shift.
So pivot.
Yeah, big pivot. So I'm old AF now, but I've had the nickname for 23 years. In the summer of 2000 is when I got it. So I was at Northeastern, went to Northeastern, started in 97. And, I kind of got involved. I was an engineering major. Then I switched to IT, but very involved in NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. Shout out WPI. And we were going on a field trip. There was a group of folks. Sorry, that was my bad. There were a group of folks. We were going on a trip. And, at the time, I was kind of like a mentor to younger students and peers or whatever. And near Fenway Park, there's a Star Market, there was a D'Angelo's, and there was a liquor store.
D'Angelo's.
So I said, boom, you go do this, you go do that, and you go do that. And someone took offense to that and said, nah, you're not my pops. I'm going to go do what I want to do. I'm going to this place. And someone else said, you know what? He is your pops. And we're going to call him that all weekend. And we went to New York. Yeah. And they just kept referring to me as, this is his pops, as we were being introduced to people in New York. Gosh. So then the following week, they kept just saying, yep, that's his pops. That's his pops. And then it kind of just stuck.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. You know what's funny about that now? A lot of the young brothers I work with talk about, yo, that's my son now. Like when they talk, yo, that's my son. Like whoever their friends are. So you were the other side. Like funny.
This might need to be an episode title, something with like Worcester Pops or something like that.
Yeah, but if here's the thing though, like you didn't give them this one either. Because there have been no dad jokes. This was a very intense episode.
Well, so
you got no dad jokes? You got any dad jokes? Give me one.
I mean,
he's the father of two funny boys.
Yeah, they're hilarious.
Yes.
So yeah, it's not. I don't really have a dad joke. I mean, my dad joke is the little one. He just likes to fart out loud and then look at us for feedback.
Are you rating? Are you like a rating?
Basically, like an 8 or 7. Yeah.
You're just there reading the Sunday paper, and you're like, "That was a 2."
So yeah, not really a joke, so to speak, but
How old are your children?
So I have a 20-year-old who Amari, he just graduated from high school last year, and next month he'll be graduating with his associates.
Oh,
so he ended up doing an online program through Duet, which is a really great program.
There we go.
I just mentioned it to her.
Yeah.
So he's getting associates from Southern New Hampshire University next month. And then my youngest is 11. He's a 6th grader. Miles is playing football. He's a super athlete, so he played every sport, but now he's starting to focus. And he's narrowed down that list to about 5 sports.
All right.
Oh, geez.
So,
yeah.
All right.
Covering the gamut. I didn't ask the dad joke because Eric is also a purveyor of trivia.
Ooh.
And are you still hosting Hello Black Trivia?
Hello Black Trivia.
No.
And can you bring it to the Woo? Was my question. Yeah.
It could come to the Woo, but I technically sold it.
Oh, you did?
Wow.
So I sold
interesting.
it to Jeff, aka the professor.
Yeah. Oh, he was your co-host. Yeah.
So now he's running Hella Black Trivia. So we made it into a booming business.
That's what's up.
So he took it over, but I think there's a possibility of him coming to Worcester.
Oh, come on.
Yeah,
I'm with it.
Yeah, but
I would have told him to bring it to Nuestra, but unfortunately, I hear they're not open anymore.
Nuestra moved on.
Yes.
But there's Havana Nights.
Havana Nights, yeah.
Okay.
And they're trivia.
Matter of fact, what's your favorite thing about Worcester? What's your favorite thing?
Several things. Well,
Besides,
Nuestra
you
was
don't
one
have to
of them.
include us.
Yeah, I don't count.
That's obvious.
Several things. Favorite thing, the connection to Major Taylor. Other thing I like about Worcester,
Kelly Square? You like Kelly Square?
No, I like Bethel AME Church.
Oh, my man, Reverend Clyde.
Well, I don't know him, but shout out to Reverend Perry.
Oh, right.
So my son was essentially his adopted grandchild.
All right.
So shout out to Reverend Perry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Parting words. We got to wrap this up because we could talk all day. Maybe you have to bring Eric back.
Part 2.
We have to bring him back. You know what I'm saying?
And you're going to be maybe coming out to the Woo more.
I'm down.
Hella Black Trivia might be out here. That's what we're saying.
Yes, good. Yeah.
Put it in the comments. Make it come.
Yes.
If you want to see it out here, and we'll make sure
you
put it in
did
the comments.
ask Pete Dunn a
Yo, it was that was great. That was great. I was like, that was the end. We met with Peter Dunn, and I was like, Peter, so like, who's your favorite hip hop artist? He was stumped. He didn't have anything ready, and he was like, nah. He said he had to expand his catalog. He said he needed to be more prepared. I respect him.
He could at least have said Jay-Z or something.
Well, I kind of fed him too. I threw him up. I was like, you think Big? You think Jay-Z or Tupac? He was like, I'm not really sure.
He's a child of the 80s. So
I don't know, Peter, but Peter, the next time you come here, what you could say and really drum up some favor is say L the Head Toucher.
Oh.
You know about him?
Larry Chiba, yeah.
Yeah, Larry Chiba, who I believe is from here.
Yeah, he's from
here.
Worcester guy.
He was pretty ill.
Signed to the same label.
It's the hip hop artist.
Oh, yeah.
So back in the day, there was this album. It was like New York hip hop and a bunch of DJ Premier beats and like Sounds of Brooklyn was on it. But El the Head Toucher also had a song on that. And I think he might have had the song with either DJ Premier or Ed O.G. or something like that.
Problem.
Yeah. So shout out to El the Head Toucher.
We're broadening our audience now. This is going to give us a
I'm
lot
a hip hop head.
credit for
I think we're tapping into that market now.
Yes.
I think they're going to be plugged in.
I like it. Yes. Good.
But listen, man, I appreciate you joining us on The Ripple Effect.
Yes,
Another drop
thank
in
you.
the bucket. E, thank you for joining us, man, being here. Make sure you like and subscribe, share this with your friends that are out there, and tune in next time to The Ripple Effect. I'm out.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're listening to The Ripple Effect, a nonprofit imperative with Ron Waddell and Marybeth Campbell. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you on the next one.